Morning everybody. As I mentioned, this is today's webinar on exploring self-care, looking after your own mental well-being. My name's Selena Hanson. I'm Sector Support Lead for the Physical Activity team at Mind. I'll be hosting today's webinar, and alongside me we've got James and Judy supporting, so I'll quickly hand over to them just to introduce themselves.
Morning everyone, lovely to see so many of you in the chat. I'm James, so I'm the Young People's Lead within the Physical Activity team, focusing on our work for 11 to 25-year-olds.
Hello everyone, nice to see you all. So many people and so many people from far away as well. It's fantastic. I am Judy Bratt, Physical Activity Team Coordinator, and at today's webinar I have the enviable task of organising the slides, and if you need anything, any help in any way, you can just pop a message in the chat for me. Thank you.
Thanks both. And in the background of today's webinar, we've got our operations manager, Sam Perks, and he'll be hopefully joining a little bit later for the Q&A. So as the title suggests, today's webinar is an exploration of self-care and looking after your own mental well-being. We'll be going through understanding what self-care is and thinking a little bit about why it's so important, as well as highlighting our own self-care library of resources, which has recently gone through a bit of an update. So some of you might have come across or used this resource in the past, and some may not, but we've given it a bit of a refresh, and I'll be going through all the new bits to it during this webinar. Just to let you know, we will be recording the webinar today, so this will be shared afterwards alongside all the links to the resources that we mention, and just to reassure everyone that only the speakers and the slides are visible on the recording, so you don't need to worry about your cameras. Please do use our Q&A function to ask any questions that come up throughout the webinar, so we can answer these towards the end. We've allocated a bit of time for that. And if we don't have time to cover all your questions during the session, it'll be possible to follow up with us, and I'll give you some details on how to do that as we finish. Just say thanks again for joining us this morning. It's great to see so many people, as James said. And if you have joined since I've started, then please do share your name, your job role and your organisation in the chat function. And one final thing just before we get started, we want to remind you all to look after yourselves during this webinar. We won't be discussing anything too heavy today. However, if you do find that you're struggling to manage any of the content, please feel free to take a break or leave entirely. And we will post some numbers in the chat for support if needed. But with that said, let's get going. So to start off with, we wanted to outline some of the learning outcomes of today's webinar. And throughout the webinar, we hope that we can increase your knowledge of self-care and exactly what it is and what it means. Increase your awareness of self-care activities and techniques that are available to you. Increase your knowledge and confidence of how to use self-care activities to support your own well-being. And be able to take part in a few of the activities from our self-care library resource that we've updated. So really the main takeaway from this webinar is that we want to provide a strong sense of why self-care is important to everyone and highlight the resources that can help you engage in your own self-care routine. Something to think about, I guess, throughout this webinar is your own relationship with self-care. Think about how much or how little you make time for self-care in your current average week, if you're doing any self-care at all, and just have that in the back of your mind as we progress through the webinar. So I'll just pass over to James.
Thanks, Selena. So I think the best place to start is really by thinking about what is self-care. I think even on this webinar this morning or in your own sporting context, you may have heard the term self-care used in many different ways. And actually that might make understanding what self-care is feel a little bit confusing. But to start off, we just really want to get a better idea of what self-care means to you as individuals. So we're going to ask if everyone could just take a few minutes to post in the chat how you define self-care. There really are no right or wrong answers. So just in a few words, it'd be great to know what you see self-care meaning in your own context. So I'll just pause for a minute as people post it in the chat and we'll highlight a few. Amazing. There's lots coming through almost so quick that it's hard to read them all out, but a lot of themes about taking time for yourself, any activities that help people to perform and recharge, dealing with worries, anxieties, also taking that moment, that kind of dedicated time. Please do keep those personal reflections coming on in the chat and continue to engage throughout the session. I think as we go to start defining self-care, it's worth saying that looking at the chat and reflecting ourselves, self-care looks different to each individual. But a common theme that I think is even running through all the examples you shared is that self-care is deliberate acts of care that help us to improve our well-being. And that's kind of through a restorative activity. When you kind of boil it down and put it really simply, self-care is exactly what it says on the tin. Taking care of ourselves. We talk a lot about stress as a mental health charity, and stress can be a threat to our well-being. It impacts how we think, how we feel, and behave in different contexts. And whilst we have some control over stress and how much we experience, no one can completely remove the stresses from our lives completely. But self-care can be viewed as a deliberate process of engaging in activities that start to combat and balance out some of those stresses. And it's important to note at this stage that what works for one of us or another person on this call may not work for somebody else that we know. Self-care is really an individual process, and also that requires a bit of trial and error, which is why I think today we're keen to provide you with a range of resources, activities that you can take away and try for yourselves. Ultimately, adopting self-care techniques should really help us to focus more on our feelings. And also, when we're looking at defining it, it's a deliberate act. And I think that's really quite key. We're choosing to devote specific time to specific restorative activities that support our mental well-being. So that's a bit about what self-care is, but why is self-care important? I think it's fair to say that many of us will resonate with some of the reasons on this slide about why people feel unable to practice self-care. Personally speaking and reflecting on myself in the lead up to this, I think when looking through the list of common barriers, I would certainly deem myself in that category of feeling a bit too busy in my life for self-care, lacking that kind of time to focus on myself. And actually, arguably, I probably haven't spent enough time considering the personal benefits for me. Instead, probably seeing self-care in the past as a bit wishy-washy or something that just wouldn't work for my personality or my life. Others of us on this call may hold unrealistic expectations about self-care, and we might just neglect it for a range of reasons. But when we look down that list of barriers on the left, there are things on there, such as a lack of motivation, that can actually be improved by practicing self-care. On top of this, self-care can help us to manage our stress, it helps us to increase our resilience, and there are loads of benefits that help us maintain a positive mental well-being. For example, some self-care activities and techniques add routine or balance to our lives. It's worth noting, self-care isn't selfish. Instead, we should really be promoting the importance of investing in ourselves. So over to Selena now to explain a little bit more about what self-care or how self-care can make us feel better.
Thanks, James. So I think worth noting that there is a scientific evidence base for self-care and why it improves your mental well-being. Sometimes it can feel like self-care is this concept that we're all sort of aware of, but we're not really sure why we do it. and that can impact our investment in it. But understanding a bit more about the scientific evidence base can really give you some solid whys as to why you should be engaging in self-care. So the part of the brain that detects stress is known as the amygdala. And when the amygdala is activated, the stress hormone cortisol, which you might have heard of before, is increased in our body as the brain is believing that it's in some kind of threat state or it's in danger. And this kind of goes back to primitive responses in the body that kind of went back to like fight or flight is something that you might have heard of. So back when we were in our cave person era, fight or flight was really important in letting us know when danger was present. Obviously, as things have moved into the modern day, we're no longer in that cave person era. The threats are quite different, but the brain still has that response to allow your body to know that it's in danger of some kind, whether that's real or just something that you perceive. And the more that you stimulate this circuit or pathway, the more you strengthen it. So it increases overall connection, the brain-body connection, and it can take time and patience, but over time, you're strengthening that connection. So it's important to remember that small efforts of self-care done consistently can lead to quite big changes. So self-care focuses on the brain-body connection, and then self-care activities can help us manage stress levels and reduce the activity of the amygdala. So once the amygdala has become active, it perceives stress in the body. There's a release of cortisol and it will remain active until our bodies are able to calm down. That's the brain wiring together to believe there's danger present. But engaging in those self-care practices when the body is perceiving stress means we're able to calm our central nervous system and reduce the activity of the amygdala. So we're sending those signals back to our brain that we're safe, we're not in danger, we don't need to be stressed in this situation. And what happens over time is that we strengthen those neural connections so much so that the brain starts to rewire itself and deals with stress or unpleasant experiences differently. Dealing with those unpleasant experiences takes less mental effort because we have a bit of a coping strategy through self-care, and this leads to overall improved well-being. So this is a process that occurs really without a conscious awareness, but it is something that we can have control over and influence. The science on this slide is a very simplified demonstration of what is actually going on in the brain during self-care. But I think it really provides a good evidence base of why engaging in self-care is so important and exactly the impact that this can have on our overall well-being. So if you did want to do any further reading on the neuroscience of self-care, there's loads of information online from really credible sources. But just to break it down into a really simple and easy to digest slide, this cycle just shows you a little bit about what's happening when our brain detects the stress, releasing the cortisol, and then how self-care can fit into that cycle in order to protect us and reduce the overall stress and improve our well-being. So with all that in mind, we've gone through a bit of the background information on what self-care is, why it's important, and what's going on from a science perspective. But we wanted to introduce you to our resource, the Self-Care Library. Now, as I said at the start of the webinar, some of you may have already come across this resource or worked with us on it, but over the last couple of weeks, we've been going through a bit of a refresh and have updated it to include some brand new activities. The self-care library that we've got is designed to be a bit of a guide of different kinds of activities that can be used to support your own mental well-being, or something that you can provide to other people who you think are struggling or wanting to explore self-care for themselves. It's an interactive resource with a variety of well-being, breathing and grounding activities, some of which are very, very short and easy to use at a moment's notice, and others can be incorporated into more of a self-care routine. So there's lots of diversity within the self-care guide there. And we've tried to include a really good mix of activities in here because, as James mentioned earlier, what works for one person in self-care might not work for another. So hopefully there's something that everyone can meaningfully engage with included. So I'll run you through a couple of the wellbeing activities that we've got. The library is split up into 3 categories, as I said. So we've got wellbeing activities, breathing techniques, and grounding techniques. On the screen now, you can see our wellbeing activities, and these are designed to be something a little bit more physical that you can do, or a physical activity that you can do as a form of self-care. The activities that you can see on the right-hand side of this slide are new to the guide. So we've got journaling in there now, positive affirmations, prayer and spirituality, a setback plan, engaging with nature, and creative activity. Some of these activities are exactly what they say on the tin, and some might not be so obvious. But when you go into our resource library, there's lots of information in there as to how to perform each activity step by step. So just to demonstrate one of those for you right now, here's a screenshot of what the guide looks like for journaling. To give you an example of what sorts of things are included, we just thought we'd throw a couple of these in here today. So journaling is one of our newest additions to the self-care library. It's a really valuable technique for self-care, helping you to manage your thoughts, feelings, and emotions and take them out of your mind and onto a page. For some people, it's something that they benefit on looking back on over time. And for other people, that's a big no-no, and it might be something that you just write down in a moment and then throw away or get rid of. There is no one size fits all. There's no right or wrong way to engage with journaling. And I think one of the most common challenges that I've come across, or that I hear from people who want to start journaling but aren't sure how to, is that they don't know what to write about. So as part of this activity, we've included some prompts on the right-hand side that'll just help you get going and hopefully fuel that fire for engaging with journaling. There's things like gratitude journaling, which you might have heard of before. And this is about writing down things that you're grateful for or things that you might want to accomplish. There's free flow writing, so having no set guideline, but just starting writing and letting whatever comes up flow down out of your pen onto your page. One of the other prompts we have is writing a letter to yourself or somebody else. And something that lots of people do with this kind of journaling is write a letter to their past self or write a letter to their future self about things that they want to achieve. And then a very classic journaling prompt is mood mapping. So mapping out your mood in a very visual way, maybe through descriptive words or pictures, maybe some small doodles. It depends how good your artistic abilities are, but getting something down on the page as a way of visually mapping out your mood can be really helpful to reflect back on. And I think writing things down in a journal can be a really cathartic way of processing your thoughts and feelings and building some self-awareness on how you manage those moments of stress and how you manage your mental well-being as it fluctuates, like all our well-being do, across different times of our life. The second section that we've got here is breathing techniques. So breathing techniques, I think, are quite common in the wellbeing space, but we've tried to keep these as simple as possible to enable you to utilize them maybe when you're a little bit short on time, or if you're feeling anxious and you're out and about. I guess it's important to note that in our anxious state, we're not always thinking clearly, so having some really simple techniques on hand can give us that big benefit to our mental well-being. Our self-care library previously merged some of the breathing techniques into the grounding section. However, think there are some clear differences between breathing techniques and grounding techniques. So I've separated them out here for ease of access. And just for your reference on this webinar, I think the way I find it helpful to think about the difference there is that breathing techniques can be a way of calming down your central nervous system, whereas grounding techniques are specifically around bringing our attention into the present and bringing all our senses back into the present moment and trying to reduce that noise of past and future. So some of the breathing techniques that we've included in the self-care library are, again, quite varied in the length of time they take. Mindful breathing, for instance, which you can see on that list there, might be something that requires more of a controlled environment or a calm environment. So possibly something that's better to do when you're at home as part of your self-care practice. Whereas some of the other techniques might be easier to use in a moment of feeling anxious or overwhelmed, just to help bring you that sense of calm. So 3 and 5 breathing is something that I personally find so useful and find myself really coming back to as one of those handy techniques that I can use anywhere at any time. And it's based around restoring the balance of oxygen in the body to help initiate that feeling of calm. You can read on this slide that when we're stressed, our breathing can change. So that can either be really rapid breathing or shallow breathing. We can hyperventilate, or alternatively, sometimes when people are experiencing anxiety, they're more likely to hold their breath or take very irregular breaths. And I think in either of those situations, 3 and 5 breathing can be really useful. So if you want to engage in this technique now, we've got enough time to do so. If you just slow your breathing down and become consciously aware of it. And when your breathing falls into a regular state where it's quite steady, just concentrate on breathing the inhale in for 3 seconds and then exhaling a little bit longer for 5 seconds. And we can go through a couple of rounds of that just now, just to help everyone on this webinar understand how this might impact you and make you feel a little bit calmer. So in your head, in your own time, just take those inhales in for 3 and then out for 5. In for 3. And out for 5. Some people find it really helpful to alternate between breathing in through the nose and then out through the mouth. But I think the main thing to think about when you're doing any kind of breathing techniques is you want to feel as comfortable as possible. So you don't want to feel panicky about holding your breath for too long or your breathing becoming a bit abnormal. So whatever works for you in terms of nose and mouth breathing. By doing this, making our exhale slightly longer than our inhale in whatever kind of pattern. So that might be breathing in for 1 and out for 3, or in for 5 and out for 10. By making the exhale slightly longer than our inhale, we're not only slowing and regulating our breathing rate, but we're also sending those key signals to the brain that we're not in danger, we're not in those threat states, and we're providing that sense of calm. So if we take that back to the earlier slide that I delivered on neuroscience, you'll remember that what we're aiming to do is reduce the activity in the amygdala in order to allow our bodies to transition into that state of stress to state of calm. And this is exactly how we do that. So inhale for 3, exhale for 5, sends all those signals of calm into our central nervous system. And you're welcome to continue breathing 3 and 5 throughout the rest of the webinar if it feels comfortable to you, but I'll just continue for the sake of time. We'll move on to our grounding activities now. So as I mentioned, the point of a grounding activity is to really bring your attention and your awareness back to the present moment. So all of the techniques in this section help you to do so. You don't have to be well practiced at meditation or mindfulness to engage in grounding activities like some people think you do. The activities that we've got in this resource are designed to specifically take you through step by step in detail exactly how you can start engaging in some grounding practice. And grounding techniques can also be a really good distraction from any unpleasant feelings that might come up when you're struggling with your mental well-being, like nervousness or anxiety or low mood. Engaging in a grounding technique sometimes helps to just create a little bit of space within your mind and make you feel more in control of exactly where your attention is going and the things that you are attending to. So something that you might have come across before is this activity of tense and relax. And this is another one that we can just run through while we're on the webinar. It's really easy to use wherever you are, as long as you're kind of sat down or stood up in a place that you can be still. And it's a way of engaging different parts of your body to gain control of where your awareness is and then purposefully directing it to different areas by deliberately tensing and relaxing each muscle group. This exercise can help you let go of any tension that you're holding that you might not be aware of, or alternatively, just do that conscious relaxation of your body. So if you're sat down or if you're stood up, it doesn't matter. Start with your feet, maybe try tensing up your toes. You don't have to close your eyes for this, but you can do if you want to. And just really focus your attention on your toes, clenching them as much as you can, just for a couple of seconds. And then when you can feel that sensation in your toes, just go ahead and release that. Really try and take note of the difference between that tense feeling and then the feeling of relaxation and how that sensation changes in your feet. And if you can, try and match this to your breathing. So when you tense, take that inhale. And when you relax, exhale. And as we did in the 3 out 5 breathing, make that exhale just slightly longer. Really breathe out that tension. And then as we're tensing, go systematically up your body. So maybe try and tense your calves just for a couple of seconds. And then release. If you can move up into your thighs, hold that little bit of tension, really squeeze them just for a couple of seconds. And then go ahead and release. Move up your body into your abdomen, so maybe tense your stomach. And release. Keep that consciousness of how that difference feels, that difference of sensation. Move up into your shoulders and your arms. And then release. Tense your hands up into fists. And then release that tension. Keep breathing those nice, repetitive, deep breaths. And then as you're not on camera, I'm not going to do this one, but tense up your face. Really screw up your face. James is demonstrating that lovely there. And then release that tension. And now take a moment to just consciously relax all the way through your body. So anywhere that you're holding tension, that might be in your jaw, in your shoulders, in your legs or your hands, just make sure you're relaxed all throughout your body and notice how you're feeling. And just sit in that feeling for a couple of seconds. And then when you feel ready, just move about a little bit again, just to bring that awareness back to the body. So this is a technique that can be done anywhere with very little effort. People don't even need to know that you're doing it. You can kind of scrunch your toes in your shoes when you're sat at your desk at work or on the bus. You can systematically move through the body, each body part, without really, engaging too much effort, physical effort. And just really be aware of noticing those sensations that come up as you tense and relax each body part. Obviously, there we focused on doing that alongside the breath. So to double up on the self-care, you can match your physical sensations in your body with your breathing, and that will just help to give you that extra feeling of calm. So that's a little rundown of some of the activities in our wellbeing resource, in our self-care library. There is a lot more on the resource library that you're welcome to go and have a look at when you get a moment. But I'm just going to pass back over to James for the last couple of slides.
Thanks, Lena. That was great. I'm feeling super relaxed now. Double whammy, breathing and tensing. So that was brilliant. We'll run through one extra example in a bit, but we just wanted to pause quickly and just note the fact that whilst we have talked a lot about self-care and the way it can improve our mental well-being, it is worth just remembering that self-care isn't a magic solution for our mental health. I think as we explored earlier, self-care can be viewed as a maintenance of well-being, something that can help us feel better and keep us feeling better. But if people are feeling that their feelings are becoming a bit overwhelming, or if you're struggling with your mental health, then we do encourage you to seek professional support. In kind of the same way as we've given a range of options with our self-care library, there's also a range of options to access support. Some people may just want to have a conversation about how they're feeling, and others who have had poor experiences of accessing support may want to try alternative options. We're going to post some links in the chat to access any support, and obviously you can see a range of options on the screen. You can call the Samaritans on 116 123, or use text services such as Shout, and you can do that by texting Shout to 85258. There's also a range of online chat platforms, peer support communities, so do explore what works for you. And finally, it's worth flagging, you can also make an appointment with your GP or call 111. In emergency situations, always call 999. And there's loads more information about support services on Mind's websites, as well as a lot out there on the internet. So do make sure you access that professional support if you need it. But I think, Selena, back to you to give another example and end on a bit of a quote.
Thank you, James. So I really wanted to include this quote as a bit of a reminder to us all, really, that you can't pour from an empty cup. I think it's so easy to go about our day-to-day lives just focusing on other things, other people, and other priorities. And we often put ourselves right at the bottom of that pile. I know I'm guilty of doing this all the time, and I'm sure that resonates with some of you on this webinar. But self-care is really, really important. And hopefully from this webinar, we've kind of shown that looking after ourselves, even in some really small ways, and our mental well-being can have a really positive impact on other areas in our lives. I guess it's important to know that the better we feel in ourselves, then the better we can feel in other areas of our lives. So
Sorry, Selena. I think even your Zoom account has become so relaxed that the sound's now bouncing slightly. So happy to pick this one up, or I don't know if you want to try one more time.
Is it still a bit awkward now?
Still a little bit awkward. So that's fine. I can pick up from here. And then hopefully it comes back. Yeah, clearly your Zoom was tensing and relaxing too much. I'm sure there's a lot of us relaxed at home. Yeah, just as you were saying there, kind of really drawing this quote. Hopefully today's webinar has shown the benefits of looking after ourselves and our mental well-being and that positive impact it can have. And yeah, we can obviously apply it to all sections of our lives. We're going to move into a bit of a Q&A opportunity in a minute to ask some questions, and there is some functionality on the Zoom where you can type in a question. Obviously, if it's easier, feel free to put it in the chat. But before we do that, given that there's such a range of extensive resources in the self-care library, we just wanted to end with a bit of an example, and that's using positive affirmations. So you may want to do this at various points in your day, or do it now. You can obviously write it down, but we'll just run through a few simple steps about how to kind of introduce positive affirmations into your daily routine. So what we encourage with positive affirmations is to bring to mind 3 positive things about yourself. You might want to just take a pause now and say them out loud to yourself. So thinking about 3 positive things about yourself. And as you start to think about those positive things, consider how that makes you feel. So do you feel a bit uncomfortable in saying those things? And why we ask you to then repeat those positive affirmations is because the more we repeat it, the more they become ingrained in our minds and in our thoughts and feelings. And as a consequence, even our actions are influenced by them. If you're kind of wanting to go away from this inspired by what you've heard and you're keen to develop a bit of a self-care routine, maybe set yourself the challenge this week of repeating 1 or 2 of those affirmations to yourself every time you look in the mirror. And over time, maybe come back in a week or maybe a month, so kind of on the 17th of Feb, and just take notice how you feel now and how that impacts your well-being. So I'm just going to pause for a few seconds to encourage everyone just to note down or think to yourselves about those 3 positive things, and then try to say them out loud for yourself. And I'll pause now for a second. Brilliant. Well, I hope you've found a few there. We really encourage you to repeat them today. Again, maybe in front of the mirror, maybe just saying them out loud, or on your journey home from work, or wherever you are located. There's so many great examples on the self-care library, and that it really is worth visiting to both kind of learn more about the positive affirmations, but also to see the range of resources that might be relevant to you. What we are going to do now is move into a bit of a question and answer session. As mentioned, there's some functionality on Zoom where you can type in a question, or feel free to put a question into the chat. I'm hoping Selena, Sam may be working, but we've also got Sam, who's kindly been answering questions in the chat throughout, so I'm sure Sam can answer a few questions. I saw one earlier on in the chat during the session, so I thought I might start with that to give people an opportunity to think about what they might want to ask. And it was just about where or when have you potentially been able to introduce self-care into your routines, or where do you find it kind of really beneficial for yourselves? I think I was reflecting on this personally, and it's probably a poor example, but I was on a super crowded train a few days ago. It felt very claustrophobic, and it's an environment I didn't really enjoy. And just picking out one of the self-care resources we shared on the webinar, the breathing window. So we didn't explore it today, but going around 4 kind of sides of a square or rectangle to again control the breathing. I found that so beneficial. And again, it's kind of exploring how it deals with those heightened senses of anxiety and helps us control our breathing. So that'd be mine. But Sam, Selena, I don't know if you want to share where maybe you started to introduce self-care to your routines.
We'll just check that my sound is back. Is that any better?
A little bit laggy, but give us a quick answer and we'll go to Sam.
Okay, well, mine would be at the time of day when I feel like I have most clarity in my mind. So in the morning when I first wake up, that's when I tend to engage in self-care. And it really just sets me up for the rest of the day. So as you mentioned with the positive affirmations, James, when I started doing that, it's something that I found really uncomfortable, just complimenting myself or saying things that I liked about myself. but I try and do it in the mirror in the morning before I brush my teeth, and it does just influence your thinking and put you in that kind of more positive state for the rest of the day. And then I think that just does have a knock-on impact for how you set up the rest of your day. So I try and do mine in the morning if I can. That helps keep me accountable.
Well, thanks, Lynn. That's great. So I think the sound is slightly lagged, but that was a great answer. So glad we got to hear it. Sam, what about yourself? Any particular times or settings that you find useful?
Yeah, I think I've really had to do quite a lot of this recently. So I've got a 1-month-old baby, and when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and she's screaming her head off, it's really tough. But actually, these self-care techniques have helped me. So one of the ones I always use is the breathing window, which I know we haven't quite covered in this, but it is on the self-care library. Really simple, and actually that relaxes me. And if anything, that relaxes my daughter as well. So does work for both of us. But I also generally at the start of the day will just do a really quick breathing activity like the 3 and 5, just to get me set up for the day. And then I'll do it at the end of the day as well when I've finished working, just to really separate the two from work and my personal life.
Brilliant, thanks both. Yeah, loads of ways of introducing it. And I think, as we said, it's about finding what works for you. Introducing that routine, which is really important, but also finding techniques that work in different situations to deal with the stresses that we all face. Still kind of very open to questions, so do post something in the chat. I think, Jen, you've asked about links to physical activity and how that can be incorporated into self-care. I don't know, Sam, if you just wanted to share a little bit more about maybe the 5 ways to wellbeing, or kind of some of the other ways that there's a lot of overlap, isn't there, between self-care, physical activity, but also other techniques that we shared today. Yeah,
definitely. And that's a great point in the chat. And in the self-care library, we do include a physical activity technique, and obviously being active is one of the 5 ways to well-being. I suppose we are also quite, we wanted to showcase different activities on this webinar that weren't physical activity based. Because actually sometimes when you're working in physical activity, especially if you're delivering physical activity such as a coach or a personal trainer, that is a lot to take on. And then self-care to be around physical activity, it can be a bit difficult to actually get away from your work and then focus on self-care. So that's why in this webinar, we wanted to focus a little bit more on breathing activities and a few grounding techniques. But it is a very, very good question. And I don't know, Selena, if you wanted to come in on that at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same, Sam. So whilst for, I guess, a lot of us, exercise or physical activity is a form of self-care, and it is something that we probably do in order to benefit our well-being, using the term physical activity, we don't necessarily mean exercise, and there's a bit of a differentiation there. So doing something physical can be exercise or can be movement based, but can also be like the physical form of writing, or the physical form of creativity. There's various other things that we can do that aren't necessarily exercise based, and I think it's really important to have many tools in your tool belt in terms of like what physical things count as activity, as opposed to thinking of physical activity as just being exercise. Ideally, what we want to do is gather more things that we can use, and it's not always, we're not always able to go out for a run when we're feeling stressed or go to the gym when we're feeling stressed. Actually, what we might be able to do in that moment is take 5 minutes to write a few things down on a piece of paper. And that in itself is an example of being physical. It's doing something physical, but it's not exercise based. So yeah, just to kind of clear up, there's a bit of differentiation there.
Yeah, really good point about language there, Selena. And I think the other thing I was just going to reflect on as well is, as someone that does a bit of physical activity, often feel the aches and pains more because of it. So actually some of those tensing activities, you really do feel it. But then that sensation of relaxing kind of helps us ground ourselves and really consider about the environments we're in and how we view our feelings, both physical and mental. I'm not sure there's too many more questions coming through. Some really nice reflections about kind of the role that physical activity can take, but also some brilliant feedback on these different breathing techniques. Sam, was there anything you spotted in the chat though that you wanted to pick up before we just wrap up and give people a bit of time to practice these?
Yeah, just one thing, I suppose there's been a few people just asking about recordings and things like that. So we will share a recording afterwards, and you can promote that to anyone. I know some people were asking, can they share it with family and friends and stuff like that? The self-care library we've developed as part of our Sport England funded system partnership, but it's available to anyone within the sport and physical activity sector, or anyone outside of it. So yeah, feel free to send on to anyone you feel may benefit.
Yeah, great clarification. And we'll definitely be able to share the slides as part of the follow-up. They'll also be in the recording. And we will post a link once again to our self-care library, so you can go there direct, as we're going to wrap up a little bit early to give you a bit of time to practice them. Just before we do close, we just wanted to share a little bit of a snapshot into some of the other information, training and resources we have as a team. Hopefully you'll be able to see the slide about our support offer. So we have a range of resources, training, toolkits and guidance, and a lot of this is accessible via our web pages. You can find our physical activity team at www.mind.org.uk/sport. And if you want to scan the QR code because you're into tech like that, you can obviously get access to the links straight through that as well. If you've joined this webinar for the first time, potentially hearing from our physical activity for the first time, and you're interested in exploring a bit more about how to then support people with mental health problems through physical activity, take a look at our e-learning training. There's a bit of information on the slide, but that's a great exploration of how to support different people with mental health problems through physical activity. And it's about a 2 to 3 hour online course. We continue to update our resources, as Selena said, we'll continue to improve the self-care library as well based on your feedback. And to stay up to date with all our new resources, such as the library, or just to find out more about our work, we'd really recommend signing up to our newsletter. It comes out on a monthly basis. We highlight some great practice from across the sports sector and also share updates on our work. So again, you can sign up via the bit.ly link on the slide, or go via the QR code, or all information is on our website. And finally, a bit of housekeeping is just, if you want to keep the conversation going, or if you have any more questions about this webinar, you'd like to learn more about self-care and our resources, do contact our physical activity team at sport@mind.org.uk. So yeah, please do get in touch if you have any questions, or do give us a follow on #SportMinds on LinkedIn. That's it in terms of it for me. But yeah, just wanted to say a massive thank you to Selena and pass to you just to say a few final words.
Oh, thank you, James. Hopefully I'm not too robotic, but apologies about the technical difficulties. They always happen, unfortunately. So, but thank you very much for listening to our webinar on exploring self-care. I really hope that you found it useful and have some takeaways from it that you can practice over the coming days and weeks. This time of year is the perfect time to start looking after yourself. I think we're all feeling the post-Christmas slump a little bit. So if you wanted to get going with a bit of a self-care routine, then hopefully you can use our resource to get on with that. Please contact us if you have any more questions or have any feedback. And please do have a look at our updated self-care library and utilise the resources that we've got there. As mentioned, all the slides and the recording will be shared shortly after this webinar. But yeah, just a huge thank you for coming along and listening to us today. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, whatever you're up to, and try and take it easy.
Thanks a lot.